Is it possible to make 100 grand a month as an online coach? So this is a question we've been asked in the past, or some variation of that. How much scale is actually possible using your method? Or I don't want to make 3 to 5 grand a month. I want to make 30 grand a month, or I want to make 100 grand a month. Fine. Like, if you want to, but let's just examine, is that really what you want? And are you prepared to accept the reality of that situation?
I think the reality of the situation is that doing 3 grand a month, 30 grand a month, 300 grand, or 1,000, 10 or 100,000, they're very different experiences. And I think everybody thinks 100 is better than 10, but actually your life probably looks quite different at that level. There's a lot more clients, there's a lot more complexity. You've almost certainly got a team working with you, so you have responsibility. You have to learn leadership. You have to be good at prioritizing things. You have to be happy to tolerate risk, a higher volume of ad spend and leads and opt-ins and all these things. So it's not necessarily that, like, because it is possible. So the market is big enough, almost certainly, unless you're picking some really weird niche. The market's big enough. So the customers exist online. You can acquire them as long as you have a system to allow you to do that. And the fulfillment system, at least the fulfillment system that we teach, can handle that volume of people. The question is, like, what's in the way of that? So the example we were discussing before was, for me to go from a 301.5 kilo deadlift to a 312.5 kilo deadlift involved me gaining 10 kilos of body weight, basically. And that might sound like, oh, well, win-win, like you gain loads of strength in the process. But actually gaining the 10 kilos changed the rest of my life. Right, so it's difficult to go up the stairs. It's difficult to go on a long walk. Like everything else, and you start not liking the way you look. You start to not fit in your clothes. All the sort of unintended consequences of the change end up being the main thing you experience. So, like, yes, you might log on to Stripe and see 100 grand. And you're like, yes, get in. But then your Monday is just firefighting and dealing with awful things and stuff you had no intention of ever getting into when you thought, I want to become an online personal trainer. So I think it's looking at, like, what does the life of someone doing that look like? And is that what I want? Rather than, do I absolutely want the top line revenue figure that I tell myself I want?
Because the top line revenue figure is often so flashy and so, like, coveted, and a lot of the gurus and advertisers will try and, like, dangle that as the carrot. What people tend to do is they'll magnify the benefits of that and they'll minimize the actual reality of what it is. And it's the same with, like, certainly, like, 21-year-old me would have thought, oh, I'd love to have a 300 kilo squat, like, and then, someone sensible like you might come along and be like, Yusuf, you realize you'd have to be clinically obese, you'd have shin splints all the time, you'd have a really sore lower back, you wouldn't be able to touch your toes, blah blah blah. And I'd be like, oh, but it doesn't matter because I'd have a 300 kilo squat, and, like, just imagine all the bitches I'd get, and imagine how, like, total of course that's what any 21-year-old with a 300 kilo squat is thinking about. You get this, like, totally blinkered view, thinking, like, oh, but once I get there, it doesn't matter, and all of those other problems will just pale in comparison. Whereas actually the only time that you get the benefit of a 300 kilo squat is when you're in the gym, and arguably not even then. It's when you're on the platform at a powerlifting competition, and that assumes that the other guy isn't doing 302 kilo squat. So we've really got to be, like, realistic about, like, what is the reality of this? Like, yes, everyone wants more money because more money supposedly produces more freedom, etc. But we're trying to build a lifestyle business here. Like, money is just the vector for freedom. It's not the freedom itself. It's not the figure on the bank account. And I think that's something that's really, like, everybody will convince themselves that, like, no, but in my case it's different, until they get there. And then they're like, right, I've still got all the same problems. My relationship's now in tatters. I've got less time. I've got all these things. So it's like, how do we figure out, what do we actually want? Because 100K a month business is no longer a lifestyle business. Like, you've probably limited your ability to travel and spend time with family.
Yeah. Well, if you look at, like, 100 grand turnover, monthly turnover business in the UK, so you've got to be VAT registered, but you've been VAT registered a long time. And you've got to think, well, how am I getting to the 100 grand a month? So you might make, if you're not careful, you don't do it correctly, you might be making less profit than when you were doing 30 grand a month. if you don't scale it properly. Because really the vector for what creates freedom is not revenue, and it's arguably not even profit. It's like your take-home pay.
Here comes the accountant.
Everyone's like, so the only person I've ever heard talk about this sensibly is Iman Gadzi. So whenever he quotes his business performance, he just quotes the net profit figure. So he's like, oh, we did 2.3 million last year. And everyone's like, well, that's not as big as I thought, Iman. And then he's like, that's profit, by the way, not revenue. He just doesn't care about the revenue figure because really it doesn't mean anything. Like, it comes into your Stripe account and it goes out against something else. And you look at your bank balance and you're like, oh shit, like I can't afford to pay the bills this month. It doesn't matter what's happened in the meantime. It's the figure at the end.
I'm sure if you wanted to, you could build a business with massive vanity metrics. Like you could pick a couple of KPIs that you could show to shareholders and be like, hey, look at this. Like, look at my revenue. But it could be absolute mess, could be total chaos under the hood because you've picked a couple of things that are flashy. And I mean, there are businesses that operate like that.
Yeah. I mean, like, so many of these companies that go and get like VC money and brag about their stats, like, actually, yeah, they might be doing like 2 million top line, but they might be spending 4. And it's like, is there freedom associated with this negative 2 million annual cash flow? But like, probably not. It's probably horrendous. It probably dictates your dreams, what you think about on a weekend. Like, it's probably pretty nasty. So I think there's not to say that like if you make 100 grand a month, it's all doom and gloom and you absolutely can. It's more that, and to reiterate, you've got to think, is the market there? Yes. Do I have a scalable acquisition process? If you're following what we teach, then yes, because if 100 leads equals 5 sales, you just need more leads. And as long as you can acquire those leads at the KPI target ad spend or cost per lead, why would it not scale, right? Like, what? It's not like the 1,000th person in your funnel knows they're the 1,000th person and they're like, oh, this would be too, he would scale too fast if I bought. Like, that isn't how it works. It does scale linearly as long as you can manage your costs. It's more like, imagine, go on.
That's the lead flow aspect of it. But what we don't see is like, because everyone's like, oh, I'm struggling to get leads. Like, that's all they're focusing on. And then but really, if someone was to be like, all right then, mate, and got the fire hose and just sprayed them with leads, suddenly they've got another problem. And it's a problem they've never anticipated before, which is, oh God, like I've got too many sales coming in. The wheels are falling off. I can't fulfill the product that I actually said I would give them. So like, there's a problem at each stage of the process. And I guess that's the having to gain 10 kilograms of body weight that you carry around all the time to be able to fix the problem that you thought you had, which was my deadlift isn't high enough. Well,
or even something as like in your face as getting like 2 or 3 emails a day from Facebook saying like, you've been billed £700, you've been billed £700, you've been, like, imagine looking at your ads manager, yesterday's data, and it's saying 1,800 quid of spend and you didn't make a sale. Because that's going to happen. That's almost certainly going to happen. You're going to have days where there's flux in the figures and you've got to zoom out and try and stay rational and try and stay objective and look at the monthly data and look at your cash flow and look at the cash in the bank and try and remove the emotional response from those things. Because unless you've got like a huge following somewhere already, so unless you're a big YouTuber or you've got a massive podcast or millions and millions of followers on TikTok or something, you're going to have to use ads to get to 100 grand turnover, almost without question. And they just ebb and flow. They have up days and down days. So can you tolerate that, the emotionality that comes with that?
Interestingly, so you mentioned having a large following, millions of subscribers or whatever. People who don't have that, it's always the case where there's a certain mindset that you have at 0, because going from 0 to 1 is quite a shift and there's a lot involved in that. But when you get to 1, you're like, oh, I thought that would solve my problem and it didn't. And this is like, I guess this is just the human condition, isn't it? Like, everything is a desire that we somehow, like, our brains fixate on thinking that when this desire is fulfilled, I'm going to be happy and my life will be complete. But fame is another one. Getting 1 million subscribers on YouTube, getting a massive following. And Tim Ferriss wrote an amazing article about this, about the hidden downsides of fame. So he's, got niche fame in his particular audience, got a very high ranking podcast. And he says that if you look at the world, like the average school, 1,000, 2,000 people, occasionally you get 1 in 1,000 people that's like a psychopath, a school shooter, or is the one that's like behind the bike sheds, like twisting the necks of pigeons or something. Now, he's like, when you're on the internet and you've got 1 million people that listen to your podcast, that 1 in 1,000 suddenly becomes 1,000 psychopaths. And it just takes a couple of them to find your address and park out and like basically camp outside your house like he's had. And then you're running into security risks. And getting recognized in shops isn't always something that you want. If there's a percentage of those people that's a psychopath or a stalker, he says that when he gets planes, there's a common thing where, the guy that holds the placard that has like Johnny to pick them up, like organized crime will do is that they'll look up the net worth of people on the flight. They have access to these like black market databases of people who are on the flights. They'll find the people who are high net worth. They'll find the guy who's going to pick him up. They kidnap him or like just remove him. And then they put their own guy in there holding up the name to try and pick you up. And then they hold you for ransom. He's like, everything's a security risk. And so he then has to book flights book the chauffeur under a fake name so that if he sees his real name, which he's spotted a couple of times, he's like, oh, that could have been a close call. That would have been me getting kidnapped and held for ransom. I mean, it probably won't happen to you if you get to 10,000 followers on TikTok, but just to be aware that there are no one's going to be like, oh, there's a successful fit pro making 20 grand a month. Better go and kidnap him. But there's unintended consequences.
So that's why like Andrew Tate and Iman and like these big YouTubers just have security details, don't they? They have like full-time security teams that follow them around. And to be honest, hearing you describe that, if I was one of them, it's just a no-brainer, isn't it? Like hire like former special forces to just come with you everywhere you go. And even if it costs you whatever the hell it costs you, like a lot of money, I assume, it's the time you get off the flight and get bundled into the back of a van with blacked out windows with a bag on your head, and you think, like, fuck, I should have paid for the bloody security thing. Damn it.
I went for the Tesco value security rather than the Tesco premium one.
Like the guy with the taser who's never used it before versus you want the person who's had to like hand-to-hand combat fight like a Iraqi general or something like in a cave, don't you? That's who you want on the plane with you.
Yeah, 100%. Not the guy who's like figuring out how to turn on the taser.
Or it's like run out of battery. That morning, he arrives with a taser that's low on battery and he's like, I'm really sorry, mate. Like, you want the guy who like, uses thumbs if he needs to.
I'm just looking at this article that Tim Ferriss wrote because that was my like recounting from memory. But yeah, he said like the point is it's just a case of total numbers and averages, and it's like you don't need to do anything wrong to get death threats and rape threats and stuff online. You just need a big enough audience.
Yeah, I remember hearing Darren Brown talk about this, that like people accuse him of all sorts of shit, and he gets like letters and mail and emails from people like accusing him of abusing them, and
especially Darren Brown.
The thing is, like, if there's anyone I'm going to falsely accuse of something, it would not be an actual mind magician, because you're done for, aren't you? Because he can just remotely fuck with you. Just ring you and fuck with you.
Yeah.
So let that be a lesson.
I mean, let that be. Heed the warning. I'm going to include the link to this article in the description because there's so many more like possible threats that I hadn't even considered. So there's the classic like dating woes, like someone kind of gets in touch with you and you think that they're into you, but actually like they're just, paparazzi trying to get some scoop on you, or harassment of family members, loved ones, desperation messages, pleas for help, impersonation, identity theft, kidnapping, attack, bait media, friends with ulterior motives, invasions of privacy. Like, it just doesn't stop, does it?
So you want a really good lawyer.
So,
and a former like Spetsnaz bodyguard. Let's get that.
Maybe 2 in 1.
Nice. A former Russian Special Forces commando who's also recently done a law degree and worked at a Magic Circle law firm. Let's hire that person. And next podcast, he can just be here. Just be standing here. Yeah.
Yeah. There's what a timely conclusion to that podcast. So hire the Spetsnaz. That was just a snippet, by the way, of the Pingu theme tune, which is my ringtone and has been for several
We're going to
years.
get a big fucking copyright takedown now, aren't we? Like, the whole episode is fine, but because there's a snippet of Pingu and some, like, 75-year-old guy will own the rights to the Pingu song, that will now have to go to court.
Damn it. We were so close, Johnny.